Hello there, this is Dr. Rinda Blom and we are doing another episode in this podcast, Psychic Steps, exploring Jungian concepts as it is applicable in child therapy. And just to remind you that if you are interested in more training in this regard, please visit my website at www.playtherapytraining.net. And also make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to get notice of more podcast episodes. Today, we are going to discuss the effect of parents and parental complexes on children's emotional and behavioral problems. This is a very relevant topic as when we work with children in child therapy, often we also have to work with the parents. So in this podcast, I'm going to discuss the different ways in which the unconscious and conscious ways of the parents can affect the development of emotional and behavioral problems in children. Children are mostly referred to a child therapist because of one or more of emotional or behavioral problems, such as anxiety, anger outbursts, resistance to go to school, or because of a traumatic experience or traumatic experiences such as abuse or neglect. Sometimes, if the child has not been exposed to overt trauma, parents and the therapist feel baffled about the core reason for the child's emotional struggle. During assessment, there are different things that need to be taken into account. For example, stressors during pregnancy and afterwards, the child's attachment with the mother and father, the possibility of neurodiversity, for example, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or autism spectrum disorder, environmental stressors, and the child's history and trauma history. In this podcast, the focus will, however, be on how the parent's own unconscious and unresolved issues can play a role in the child's behavioral and emotional problems. Let's take, for example, a small age difference between two siblings. Let's say two brothers are born 14 months apart. The eldest brother needed to start to share his primary attachment figure at an age before he reached object constancy, which is normally about at age 3.5. Let's say further that the oldest child was born with a biological wiring and temperament that needs an attachment figure more than average, which is referred to as having high self-object needs. The birth of the younger brother can now be experienced as abandonment and might lead to primal rage in the unconscious of this child. Furthermore, the child might start acting out these feelings, for example, by being more demanding, acting aggressively towards his mother and brother, and so forth. Let's say, for example, the mother felt bullied by her older brother when she was a child, and this issue was never resolved. The behavior of her eldest son can trigger the sibling complex in the mother, and the mother might react towards the child's problematic behavior as if she is the one that is being bullied again. The parents most probably might think the child needs discipline and start putting the child into timeout each time when the child has a meltdown. This escalates his feelings of anger and abandonment, and he is further deprived from his high self-object needs. This is often the point where the desperate parents bring the child to the child therapist, still completely baffled about the reasons for the trouble. In order to resolve this, unresolved issues in the unconscious of one or both parents might be needed to be taken into account too. Let's now unpack this issue by making use of some concepts from the Jungian theory. Children frequently live, suffer, and express the unconscious problems and complexes of their parents. Every human being has a mother and a father complex. The father and mother complex is formed by the archetypal image of mother and father, coming from the child's collective unconscious and frozen memories of traumatic moments buried in their unconscious. Now, what is an archetype? An archetype is a pattern of behavior and has an intent. That is, they want to give rise to certain actions or activities. And these archetypes are already available in the child's collective unconscious for the mere fact of being born in a certain culture. Let's discuss two interesting archetypes in terms of childhood, namely the puer and the senex. The intent of the puer archetype is to play. A child learns a great deal about his or her world during play, and Jung was adamant that a proper childhood should allow a child time for carefree play and exploration. By contrast, the intention in the archetype of the senex is to be responsible. The senex is the energy pattern in us that would have us act in a mature and responsible way. Now, when you look at these two archetypes, the puer and the senex, you can think about children and their wiring. Some children come into the playroom, and from the very start, you can see that they are extremely serious and has a wise part inside of their psyche. We often refer to that as an old soul. That would also be where the senex archetype is constellated in the child's psyche. Other children are by their innate nature extremely playful and carefree, and that would refer to the puer archetype. The senex and the puer exist along a continuum. We have each archetype within us, but the ratio of one to the other varies from person to person. The child who is a senex type manifests more of the behaviors and traits of the senex archetype, while the puer type lives more oriented to the puer archetype. Let's define the two types more explicitly. The child also lives in each of us, regardless of our age, as one of the paired archetypes. The opposite in this pair is the senex, or the old person. Carl Jung felt that while each human has both these archetypes, one of them is our preferred way of approaching life. Perceptives, in terms of their wiring, people who have a very perceptive type, tend to lean more toward the child and the puer archetype, while children and adults who have more a judging type tend more towards the senex side. In the type theory, therefore, perceptives are more likely to have the flexibility and adaptability required to make good parents. While we are young, the puer is a key archetype, and its intended activity, play, is how we learn about the world. Even as we age, the puer has much to offer us. For example, staying connected to our own inner puer can keep us youthful and fun-loving. It can help us remain optimistic and enthusiastic about life, and imaginative and curious about the world. The puer fosters our creativity and whimsy in its spontaneous openness to whatever comes along during the day, according to Jung. Now, I think we can see that for a child therapist, it might be a good idea to have access to your puer archetype in order to connect with the child, the naive, innocent child within, but also with the children without. The senex archetype will assist with the more serious stuff in terms of planning and being intuitive, in terms of what does the child need and what is going on and what is the best approach for the parents. The personal father and mother and other male or female figures, as well as the opposite sex in the shadow of the parents. So in terms of the dad, it might be his feminine part. In terms of the mum, it might be her masculine part. Influence the formation of the father and mother complex in the child. What is meant by this parental imago? Jung recognized that mother and father were archetypes like the child, the puer, and the old person, the senex. As such, they were innate. We are born with an inner sense or an imago of these two figures. Our personal experiences of our real-life mother and father flesh out these archetypes, since all archetypes get their contents from the material of conscious experience, according to Jung. The personal coloration of the parental imagos or the parental complexes begins in childhood, often being at the root of the problem in the problem child. When a child is termed neurotic, Jung felt the cause was likely something about the home environment or the relation between the parents or the parent and the child, or in one of the parents themselves, or in the relationship between the parents. The child developed a neurosis from gross parental negligence, or maybe parental slothfulness, neurotic anxiety, or something else in the parents that is unexpressed and incomplete. Emotion is the glue of the various associated elements of a complex. Early family-induced complexes do not disappear from the child's psyche when the child gets older and have more exposure to social and cultural stimuli or social media and the school environment. According to Murray Stein, a well-known Jungian analyst, the mother and father complexes continue to dominate the scene in the personal unconscious. They are giants. A positive mother complex links up with the archetypal positive maternal, and a negative mother complex an extensive alienation from the archetypal positive maternal. And often we can see this play out in the projections of the child. The same can be applied towards a positive and negative father complex. A negative complex is revealed by a more or less clear rejection of the parental figure and contains predominantly aggressive psychic energy. And we might see that in the play of the child in terms of a parental figure that's thrown out aggressively out of the sand tray, or sometimes a male or female doll that ends up in the dustbin after being beaten up. A conscious statement from a teenager, for example, would be that there is no way I like to be like my mother and or my father. A teenager might be conscious enough to make that statement. A younger child would play that out in their projections in the playroom, but might most probably not be conscious of what they are playing out. The teenager's statement about a parental figure might at first sound positive or neutral, yet a devaluation or a negative tone by the unconscious might be observed or felt by the intuitive therapist. In a younger child, the presence of a negative father or mother complex might be projected by specific figurines in the sandbox, or, for example, by drawing a vicious witch next to a vulnerable, abandoned baby. Both positive and negative complexes, with their idealizations and demonizations, goes back to the collective unconscious. The formation of a positive or negative parental complex cannot be reduced merely to the personal parents, as we still know little about the role of genetic aspects in this regard. And therefore, this is very important to understand that when a child plays out or projects a negative mother or a negative father complex, it doesn't always just refer to the personal parents. Early personal experiences of the child becomes part of the core of the complex, and these experiences are dissociated from the conscious ego complex, but must be taken into account in the structure of the core of a complex. As these experiences are often pre-verbal, a child will not be able to talk about this, but will be able to project this in the sand tray art or drawings. Hypothesis about the development of a negative mother or father complex can be formulated by looking at early experiences in the child's life, for example, frequent hospitalization, or by having knowledge about the character traits of the parents, for example, looking at the projections in sand trays. An idealization or devaluation of the mother or father can often be picked up during child therapy through projections in terms of sand tray work and drawings. This can be linked with the activated positive and negative parental archetype in the collective unconscious of the child, as well as the positive and negative parental complex in the personal unconscious of the child. Examples of positive mother figures in the sand tray might be a wise old woman, a positive heroine, a queen, and playing out themes of nourishment like cooking and baking and taking care of a baby. Examples of a negative mother complex in the playroom might be playing with a witch, such as the witch in the Rapunzel story, or the Snow White witch, often abusing a child or a baby figure, or a witch that wants to enter the dollhouse and hurt the people inside. A mother that acts as a puhala, which is like acting like a helpless little girl and not in the adult ego state. A devouring, suffocating mother, depicted by, for example, a very hungry shark or crocodile that keeps swallowing objects in a hungry, devouring way but never gets full. I've seen this played out in children as young as 2 years old in the playroom, and where they have a compulsion to play this feeding and swallowing of the shark for 10, 15 or 20 minutes without stopping. A theme of a disappearing, abandoning mother played out in the dollhouse. Or acting as a compensating mother and almost doing so much for the children, and that would be depicted in the play of the child. For example, the overburdened mother that sacrifices herself totally for the children, and that lead to a lot of guilt feelings in the children. Examples of a positive father complex in the child's play can be a wise old man, a positive hero such as playing with the Superman hero or Hercules from the Greek mythology as a hero, an experienced teacher, a just judge, a tolerant and mature personality of a man, for example, a king. A child might play out a war scene with a good side and a bad side, and depicting the king as the leader of the good side. Examples of a negative father complex in the child's play might be the puher, which is the eternal adolescent, and Peter Pan would often be used as a figurine for this. So this is where the father stays in the adolescent phase of development, and the puhela is the female version of this. A coward, a false prophet, a negative dictator, a tyrant. Now, a heroic father can also sometimes contribute to the development of a negative father complex. Why? Because heroes are often very hard to approach and form a relationship with their children. Often, if the father has been in the war or the military, they do not allow their children too close to them in the fear of damaging them. Often, the traumatized father is encapsulated in their own world and suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's talk a bit further about positive and negative parental complexes in child therapy. The personal mother is often not the sole cause of the child's negative mother complex. The archetypal image also plays a role. Negative characteristics may be projected upon the personal mother that actually belongs to the negative mother archetype. In the sand tray, the spider, the octopus, a crab, quicksand, a crocodile, or a witch can carry the imago of the terrible mother. The eternal youth, or the Peter Pan complex, where a man stays in the adolescent phase, is considered as part of a negative mother complex. The boy could not psychologically leave the mother and turn towards the masculine, which is the father, for identification. And often that is where the mother had a very devouring nature. Archetypal patterns of the mother as a conventional mother serving the family in a general way. For example, mother figures in the dollhouse will fit in here, taking care of the babies or the children's need, and this often depicts a positive identification with the mother. The opposite of the mother is called or referred to as hero. And this is a mother figure that has no interest in her family or assuming the role of the mother. Miniatures or dolls in the form of Barbie dolls will fit in here. A tomboy, often referred to as the Amazon woman, referred to the independent and self-sufficient type of woman. And her main interest is in her career and achievement. So there's a lot of identification with the masculine or the father. The Artemis act as a friend or a competitor with men. And when this archetype of a woman takes too strong hold, the mother might become like a tyrant. You might see small figures of female athletes, women skin divers, or cowgirls that might be used in the sand tray. And then we can see the female or feminine heroine in the sand tray, for example, the Wonder Woman. We also get a woman as medium. This is intuitive woman that lives in a close relationship to the collective unconscious. And often you might see an overlap of collective and personal symbols in the sand tray. For example, a wise old woman, a fairy godmother, a nice caring grandmother. And the dark side of this, the shadow side, might be an old witch or a wicked fairy. The use of a father figure might refer to the personal father or archetypal ideas associated with the image of father. For example, a king as symbol in the sand tray, a positive father, structure, rules and laws, a hero, a wise old man, and a king. A king and hero sometimes are combined. So the hero often projects the dynamic, outgoing masculine energy that is in the forefront of the war or that is saving a trapped princess from a cage. And this positive masculine energy helps to be assertive and courageous in the face of dangers and life-threatening situation. The principle of action and forward-moving energy is the most important. The father is associated with the sun and the mother with the moon, and figures that represent the hero in the sand tray might be Superman or Batman, other male figures such as cowboys, road workers, firemen, spacemen, Yoga from Star Wars. Representations of the wise old man that refers symbolically to the inner wisdom or guide or teacher. Robin, Batman's sidekick, is a heroic son figure. A negative father archetype might be a tyrant. A positive relationship with a personal father in a child also then will lead to and refers to a positive feeling towards a structured society and rules. And a negative father complex, difficulty with rules and spiritual principles, which is also referred to as an authority complex. And you might get, especially in teenage years, that you get that a child is going in total opposition towards all systems and structures. Look out for the presence of a negative father complex and how this is depicted in, for example, the sand trays of the child. Now let's just have a word about the characteristics of a deaf mother that is even worse than a negative mother complex. The deaf mother is cold, do not like children, resent her children, is envious of the children, does not know her children, is not interested in them, see herself as a victim, think life is about her and only her, so is very self-observed, constantly judging, opinionated, cruel, very negative, abusive, kills hope, initiative, and creativity and absolutely drains the child's energy. This relates to what is known as narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, and it's more than just a negative mother complex. How does healing from a negative parental complex take place in child therapy? A positive transference allows the therapist to stand in for the parents, both the mother and the father, at different stages of therapy. As a parental complex is constellated by the therapist, the child's experience of the therapist as a different kind of parental figure adds material to the old complex and builds a new layer into or over it. The new structure do not replace the old entirely, but can modify it and make it less rigid to the extent where the complex no longer restricts the child's life. For example, the harshness of an abusive parental imago might be softened by the presence and acceptance of the therapist. In our work with child clients, we would normally first encounter the dark, negative aspects of the parental imagos, the projections that the child make in the art and centre. And for this, look back at the examples that I've mentioned of how you can see that in the projections of the child in the playroom. So, for example, the tyrant, the pirate as a negative father, or a domineering witch or negative mother figure. And this might include very deep feelings in the child of disappointment and devaluation, of destructive aggression that plays out. Envy or inferiority might be played out in the centre or the play themes. Often these feelings are incompatible with the child's superego and moral education of the child. For example, a child that say, "My brother is bullying me, but it's not that bad, and I don't want you to think bad of him." Or a child that on the one hand complains about a sibling and tell you that she wants to kill that sibling, and that sibling makes her very angry. And then just after that, confess her extreme love for the sibling. The deprivation, lack of understanding, abuse, or inadequate empathy that was often experienced in early childhood as deep wounding must first be worked through in therapy. As a therapist, remember that not only the negative parental complexes, but also the positive aspects of the parent will most probably be unconscious and repressed. In the course of therapy, one of these complexes, either the negative parental complex or the positive parental complex, will be more dominant. Let's now look at more ways in which the parent's unconscious can influence the child. What usually has the strongest psychic effect on the child is the life which the parents and ancestors do, for we are dealing here with the age-old psychological phenomenon of original sin, have not lived. And that is called the unlived life of the parents. During the first 2 or 3 years of the child's life, they are totally unconscious of themselves, and that might almost be compared to an animal state. Just as the child in embryo is practically nothing but a part of the mother's body and wholly dependent on her, so in early infancy, the psyche is to a large extent part of the maternal psyche and will soon become part of the paternal psyche as well. The primal psychological condition is one of fusion with the psychology of the parents, and individual psychology in the child is only potentially present. Therefore, the nervous and neurosis, nervous system disorders, psychic disorders of children right up to school age depend very largely on disturbances in the psychic world of the parents, if we're not referring to a very specific trauma that took place outside of parental influence. All parental difficulties reflect themselves without fail in the psyche of the child, sometimes with pathological results. The dreams of young children often refer more to the parents than to the child themselves. According to Carl Jung, the content of big dreams in early childhood, for instance, the first dreams that patients could remember at about age 4 to 5, was often so very unchildlike that at first he was convinced that it had more to do with the unconscious of the parents than with the child. A marked change occurs when the child develops consciousness of his or her ego, a fact which is registered by referring to himself as the I. This normally takes place between the 3rd and 5th year, but it might begin earlier. From this moment, we can speak of the existence of an individual psyche, though normally the psyche attains relative independence only after puberty if everything went right. Up till then, the psyche is largely the plaything of instinct and environment. When we look at children and their problematic behavior and emotions, we have to take into account unconscious, unresolved issues in one or both parents. Often, the child's behavior is far less the expression of his own inner life than a reflection of the disturbing influences in the home. In working as a child therapist, you'll have to pay attention to the psychic state of the parents, to their problems, the way they live and don't live, the aspirations they have fulfilled or neglected, the predominant family atmosphere, and the parents' attachment style and internal working models developed with their own parents in their family of origin. All these psychic conditions influence a child profoundly. In the early years, the child lives in a state of what is called participation mystique with his or her parents. Time and again, it can be seen how the child reacts immediately to any important developments in the parental psyche. Needless to say that often both the parents and the child are totally unconscious of what is going on. According to Jung, the child who enters school at 6 is still, for the most part, of the psychic product of his parents. Endowed, it is true, with a nucleus of ego consciousness that start developing at about 3, but incapable of asserting his unconscious individuality. One is often tempted to interpret children who are peculiar, obstinate, disobedient, or difficult to handle as especially individual or self-willed. This is often a mistake. In such cases, we have to examine the parental milieu, the parental psychological conditions, and history. I want to end off today by saying that a child often functions in a system and is part of the system, and be it the unconscious participation mystique, or where the child grows more conscious as they enter the teenage years. As a child's therapist, we have to take note in the child's projections and in what they say of the parental archetypes, the parental complexes, and as a child therapist, to act on and help the child with our presence and our being authentically there and unconditionally accepting, to constellate, to help a negative parental complex to become less rigid, and to add structure and the possibility for forming a positive mother or father complex where that has not been constellated. And that is all for today.